Emily Turner had always lived with an undercurrent of tension that she could never quite understand. As a child, she had asked countless times about her father. But the answers she received from her mother were always vague or dismissive. "Your father left us," her mother would say in a tone that left no room for argument. "He never cared about us. And you're better off without him." It had always been like that. No matter how many questions Emily asked or how many nights she stayed awake wondering about the father she had never known, her mother remained steadfast. There were no photographs of him, no keepsakes, no mementos that might offer a glimpse into his personality or life. There was only silence, the kind that hangs heavily in the air, suffocating any curiosity Emily had. After her mother's sudden death from a heart attack, Emily found herself standing in the small, cluttered house she had grown up in, surrounded by boxes and memories of a life she didn't fully understand. It was a strange feeling being back here, knowing her mother would never walk through the door again, never scold her for being too loud or praise her for her accomplishments. All that remained were the things her mother had left behind: the clothes, the furniture, the books, and one particular box that caught Emily's attention. It was a dusty, old wooden box tucked away in the back of her mother's closet, hidden beneath layers of forgotten belongings. The box was unremarkable at first glance, its surface scratched and worn with age. But something about it felt different, as if it held secrets that had long been kept from Emily. With trembling hands, she lifted the box from the shelf, the weight of it heavy in her arms. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she was invading her mother's privacy by opening it. But her curiosity won out. She set the box down on the bed and carefully pried it open. Inside, she found a collection of letters, hundreds of them, neatly stacked and tied with a faded ribbon. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink smudged in places, but the words were still legible. As Emily pulled out the first letter, a faint scent of lavender filled the air, a scent she recognized from her mother's perfume. It was almost as if her mother had left a part of herself in these letters, something Emily could never fully understand. She began to read the first letter, her heart racing as she saw the familiar handwriting of a man she had never met but had been told about countless times. The letter was addressed to her mother, and the words were filled with longing and regret. The man, whom Emily now realized was her father, spoke of his love for her mother and the pain he felt at being forced to leave. He apologized for the hurt he had caused, though he never explained why he had left in the first place. As Emily read through the letters, each one revealed a piece of her father's life, a life that had been hidden from her for as long as she could remember. There were letters of sorrow, of love, of hope, and even a few that hinted at the reasons for his departure. But none of them offered a clear answer. They were fragments of a story that had been lost to time. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she read. The man in the letters seemed so different from the distant figure her mother had described. He wasn't the cold, heartless man who had abandoned them. He was someone who had loved her mother deeply, someone who had regretted leaving. But why had her mother kept these letters hidden? Why had she never shared them with Emily? The questions swirled in her mind as she finished reading the last letter. In the final lines, her father had written, "I hope one day you'll understand why I had to leave. I hope you can forgive me, and perhaps, in time, you will find it in your heart to let me be part of your life again." Emily felt a mix of emotions: anger, confusion, and sorrow, all vying for her attention. For years, she had believed her father was a distant memory, a man who had chosen to abandon them. But these letters painted a different picture. They told a story of a man who had been forced to make a difficult decision, one that had torn his family apart. And now, all these years later, Emily was left to pick up the pieces. She closed the box slowly, her hands shaking. The discovery had left her feeling disoriented, as if the ground beneath her had shifted. For the first time, she felt the weight of her mother's silence, the silence that had kept her from knowing the truth. But the question remained, what was she supposed to do with this newfound knowledge? Her father was still out there, somewhere, but where? And what was she supposed to do now that she knew the truth? Emily felt a surge of determination. She couldn't let these letters go unanswered. She had to find him. She had to know the truth about why he had left, and maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to forgive him. But where would she even begin? The letters didn't provide an address, just a vague reference to a small town in Maine. With a deep breath, Emily made up her mind. She would find him. She would go to that small town and confront her father. It didn't matter how far she had to go or what she had to do. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to stop until she had them. But as she stood up, holding the box close to her chest, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her journey was just beginning. The road ahead would be long and filled with uncertainty, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. In the silence of the room, Emily made a vow to herself. She would uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She would find her father. And she would discover the secrets that had been kept from her for so long. And perhaps, in the process, she would finally find a way to heal the wounds of the past. Emily spent the next few days in a blur of emotions. The letters weighed heavily on her heart, each one pulling her deeper into the mystery of her father's absence. It was as if the truth about her family had been hidden beneath layers of silence for too long, and now it was slowly unraveling before her eyes. She couldn't shake the image of her father from her mind. The man who had written those heartfelt letters seemed so different from the man her mother had painted, a shadowy figure who had abandoned them without a second thought. But now, Emily was forced to confront a different version of him, a man full of regret, longing, and sorrow. She felt an overwhelming need to understand more. Her work at the communications firm became a distant thought. The deadlines and projects that once consumed her time seemed insignificant in comparison to the whirlwind of emotions she was navigating. She had barely slept since she found the box, her mind racing with questions. Why had her mother kept these letters from her? What had really happened between them? And most importantly, why had her father left them all those years ago? Emily began to piece together what little she knew about her father. Her mother had always insisted that he had been selfish, that he had abandoned them for his own reasons. But none of that seemed to line up with the man in the letters. There were no signs of cruelty or abandonment in the words he had written. In fact, he seemed to have been genuinely heartbroken by the separation. With no clear answers at hand, Emily turned to the next piece of the puzzle, the address her mother had hidden in the letters. The town in Maine was unfamiliar to her, but it was the only lead she had. She spent hours researching it, scouring maps and looking through old phone directories. The small town of Smallwood, nestled along the coast, was quiet, isolated, and, in many ways, the perfect place for someone to disappear into. But as Emily prepared to leave, doubts began to creep into her mind. What if her father had moved on? What if he had forgotten about her, or worse, had no desire to meet her? The uncertainty was almost too much to bear. Yet, despite the fear gnawing at her, Emily couldn't let it go. She had to know. She had to face the man who had been both a stranger and a ghost in her life. The day she finally booked her flight to Maine, Emily felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The small town was far from New York, both physically and emotionally. The fast-paced life she was accustomed to seemed so distant now. And as the plane descended toward the unfamiliar landscape of Maine, she felt a deep sense of isolation. She was leaving behind everything she knew, everything that had defined her life, and heading into the unknown. The taxi ride from the airport was long, winding through small towns and rural landscapes. The driver, an older man with a weathered face, glanced at her curiously in the rearview mirror. "Smallwood, huh? Not many folks go there anymore," he said gruffly, his eyes focused on the road. Emily nodded, feeling a sense of finality in his words. Smallwood was a place where people went to disappear or to heal. It was a quiet town, untouched by the hustle and bustle of the modern world. She wondered if her father had found peace here, or if he had only been running from the past. As the taxi approached the town, Emily's heart began to race. She didn't know what to expect. The houses here were old, their paint chipped and faded, standing in stark contrast to the shiny buildings and sleek apartments she was used to in New York. The air was different too, fresh and tinged with the smell of the ocean. It was a far cry from the urban sprawl she called home. When the taxi finally pulled up to the small, dilapidated house at the edge of town, Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was nothing like the house she had imagined when she had read the letters. It was humble, weathered by time, and lonely. But it was her father's home, and for better or worse, it was the place she had come to find him. The house stood at the end of a long, overgrown path. A faded porch light flickered above the front door, and a small window near the entrance revealed the faint glow of a lamp inside. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she stepped out of the taxi and made her way to the door. Every step she took felt heavy, as if she were walking into an entirely new chapter of her life. Her hand hesitated on the doorbell for a moment. She could hear the faint sounds of movement from within the house. A man's voice, low and soft, but clear enough to make her heart skip a beat. It was him, her father. He was here. Taking a deep breath, Emily rang the doorbell. There was a long pause before the door creaked open, and there, standing in front of her, was the man she had never met, the man whose face she had only seen in a few blurry photos from her mother's old album. He was older now, his hair thin and white, his face deeply lined with age. His eyes, though, were the same color as hers, gray, clouded, and filled with a mixture of sadness and recognition. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid for years. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she took in the sight of him. He looked so frail, so much older than she had imagined. But despite his age, he seemed to stand tall, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Emily?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She nodded, barely able to breathe. She wanted to say so much about the letters, about the questions that had been haunting her for years, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she simply stepped forward, and for the first time in her life, she wrapped her arms around the father she had never known. The hug was awkward, tentative at first. But as her father gently returned the embrace, something deep within Emily shifted. The years of pain, the confusion, the anger, all of it seemed to melt away in that moment. The long journey had just begun, but already, Emily felt a sense of peace she had never known before. As Emily stepped back, she looked up into her father's weathered face, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Her emotions were a tangled mess: relief, confusion, sorrow, and a strange sense of comfort all at once. There was so much she wanted to say, but the words escaped her. William Turner, her father, smiled faintly as he motioned for her to come inside. His hand trembled slightly as he held the door open wider, and Emily noticed how fragile he seemed, as though every movement took great effort. It struck her that this man, the father she had never known, had lived a lifetime of struggles without ever being a part of her own. The inside of the house was small but cozy, with a rustic charm. Wooden beams lined the ceiling, and the furniture was old but well kept. It felt like a place frozen in time, a quiet sanctuary where memories were carefully stored away from the world. "Please come in," William said. His voice warmed despite the years of separation. "I don't have much to offer, but I can make some tea. You must be tired from your journey." Emily nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the modest living room. The air smelled faintly of herbs and old books, a comforting scent that reminded her of her childhood, of the rare moments when her mother had been soft and tender. She wondered if this house had ever felt like home to her father, or if it had always been a place of solitude and regret. As she followed him into the small kitchen, she noticed a few things that made her heart ache. A faded photograph was taped to the fridge, her as a child, around 5 years old, wearing a yellow dress and holding a stuffed bear. It was a picture she didn't recognize, but one that her father had clearly kept close. She couldn't bring herself to ask him about it just yet. The grief of her childhood, The years spent without her father seemed too heavy to revisit so quickly. William sat down at the small table, gesturing for her to do the same. He moved slowly, carefully, as if every action required deliberate thought. His blind eyes, though, seemed to hold a depth of wisdom and sorrow. The room was silent except for the soft clink of the kettle as it began to boil. "Do you want to talk about it?" William asked after a long pause, his voice quiet but steady. "I know I owe you so much more than just words." Emily swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking deep into her chest. She had spent so many years wondering why he had left, why her mother had never spoken about him with any kindness. Now, sitting across from him, she was flooded with questions. So many questions. I don't even know where to begin," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For so many years, I was told you left because you didn't care about us, that you abandoned us. And I believe that." William nodded slowly, as if preparing himself for a painful truth. "I know. Your mother. She had her reasons. She was angry, and I understand that. But I never stopped thinking about you, Emily. Not for a single day. And I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Emily blinked, stunned by his admission. Safe? The words hung in the air like an unresolved puzzle. She had always believed her father's departure was a choice made out of indifference or even cruelty. But now it seemed there was a much more complicated story behind it. Safe from what? She asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. William's hands shook as he poured the hot water into a teapot. His eyes, still clouded with blindness, seemed to focus on something far away, lost in a memory that pained him. He let out a slow, steady breath before answering. "Your mother and we weren't good for each other," he began, his voice rough. "We fought a lot, and I had my own demons. I didn't want you growing up in a house full of anger and resentment. I thought if I left, it would be better for you, better for both of you." Emily's chest tightened. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but they were jagged and broken, making it difficult to see the full picture. She had spent her whole life thinking that her father had abandoned them for no reason at all. But now she could see the complexity of their relationship. The pain her father had carried with him, even as he had stayed away. "I don't know if I can forgive her," Emily said softly, her voice breaking. "For keeping this from me. For never telling me the truth." William's expression softened, and he reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. "It wasn't just your mother's choice, Emily. I made mistakes too. I should have fought harder to stay in your life. But I was lost, and I thought leaving was the only option. I was wrong." Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She couldn't. She didn't know if she was ready to confront all the emotions that were flooding her at once. She had lived her whole life without him, believing he had chosen to leave. And now she was faced with the reality that things weren't as simple as she had once thought. "I never wanted to hurt you," William continued, his voice full of regret. "I thought you would be better off without me, but I was wrong. I should have been there. And now, I just want to make it right. If you'll let me." Emily's heart ached. She had spent years wondering why her father had never come back, why he hadn't tried to find her. But now, looking at him, seeing the vulnerability in his face, she realized that he had been living with the same pain, the same regret. And yet, here he was, asking for a second chance. She took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "I don't know what to do with all of this. I'm angry and I feel betrayed, but I'm also relieved. I don't know if I can forgive everything right away. But I want to understand. I want to hear your side." William smiled faintly, as though the weight of her words had lifted something heavy from his chest. "That's all I can ask for, Emily. All I ever wanted was for you to know the truth. The whole truth." For the first time since she had stepped through that door, Emily felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. It was fragile, delicate, but it was there. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of healing. Not just for her father, but for herself too. The journey ahead would be long, but Emily felt a flicker of peace. They had both spent so many years apart, each carrying their own burden. But now, in this small, humble kitchen in Smallwood, they had taken the first step toward healing. And maybe, just maybe, it was a step they could take together. The next few days in Smallwood were a blur of conflicting emotions for Emily. She stayed with her father in the small house, taking the time to listen and piece together the fragments of a history she had never known. Every conversation, every shared moment, was like a puzzle being slowly assembled. But it wasn't easy. Nothing about their relationship could ever be fixed with just words or time. The scars, both hers and his, ran deep, and healing would take more than a few days of talking. Her father, though blind, had a remarkable way of making her feel heard. He would ask her about her life in New York, her job at the communications firm, her friendships, and her dreams. It was as if he wanted to know everything about the woman she had become, even though he had missed all the years of her growing up. And Emily found herself sharing with him more than she ever had with anyone else, even though she still carried an undercurrent of anger in her heart. She told him about the loneliness that had shaped her childhood, how she had been forced to grow up quickly, how her mother's bitterness had been like a dark cloud over everything. At night, they would sit together, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about the past. Her father would tell her stories of his life before the separation, his childhood in a small town just like this one, his dreams of becoming a writer, his love for her mother when they were young. It was hard for Emily to imagine him as the man he described, a young man full of hope and passion, before life had eroded those dreams. But slowly, the more he spoke, the more she began to see him as a person, not just as the absent father who had left her. Still, the questions kept gnawing at her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room, Emily sat down next to her father. She had been quiet for a while, her mind racing with the pieces of information she had gathered, but still so many things remained unanswered. "Can you tell me more about why you left?" Emily asked, her voice almost a whisper. She had asked him about it before, but this time, there was an edge to her voice, a need for clarity that hadn't been there before. "Why didn't you come back for me? Why didn't you try harder to find us?" William's face, once calm and serene, faltered slightly, his expression tightening as though the question had opened a wound he hadn't wanted to revisit. He sighed deeply and took a slow breath before answering. "It wasn't because I didn't want to, Emily. I wanted to come back. Every day I thought about you. But your mother," he hesitated, looking for the right words. "She was stubborn. She told me to leave. She said we would be better off without me. And I thought it was what was best for you both. But I was wrong. I should have fought for you. I should have never left." His voice cracked, the weight of the past hanging heavily in the air. Emily's heart wrenched as she listened to him. It was clear now that his decision had not been one made out of cruelty, but out of a misguided attempt at protecting her. But that didn't erase the hurt, the abandonment, the years of confusion and emptiness she had felt. "But I don't understand," Emily said, her voice trembling. How could she not tell me the truth? Why keep those letters hidden? Why not just explain everything to me? William reached out, his hand brushing hers gently. "Your mother, she loved you so much, Emily. But she was broken. She didn't know how to handle everything that had happened. She wanted to protect you from the pain of knowing the truth. She didn't want you to think ill of me. But she also didn't want you to be hurt by the truth of our past. So, she kept it all from you." The pieces were starting to come together, but the truth still felt too much to bear. Emily could barely comprehend the idea of her mother keeping such a crucial part of their past hidden from her. The anger she had felt toward her father now shifted, mingling with a sense of betrayal toward her mother. Why had she never been honest with her? Why had she denied her the chance to know the truth about her own father? But as she sat there, listening to her father's words, she realized something else. He was here now, in front of her. He had sought her out, and he wanted to make things right. Emily's chest tightened as she tried to reconcile the man who had abandoned her with the man who now sat in front of her, asking for forgiveness and offering an olive branch. I don't know if I can forgive her. Not yet, Emily admitted, her voice small. But I think I can forgive you. William's eyes softened, and for the first time, Emily saw him truly as a father. He wasn't perfect, and he had made mistakes, but he was trying now, and that was more than she could have ever asked for. Forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight, Emily, he said gently. I know that. But I'm here now. And I'll be here for as long as you'll let me. I want to be part of your life. Even if it's late, I want to try to make up for the time we lost. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she nodded slowly. She had spent so many years angry, so many years holding onto the pain of being abandoned. But now, sitting in this quiet house with her father, she realized that she had the power to let go of some of that anger. It wouldn't happen all at once, and it wouldn't be easy, but perhaps, just perhaps, she could begin to heal. I don't know what the future holds, she said softly, her voice trembling. But I want to try. I want to know you, even if it takes time. William smiled. The first genuine smile she had seen from him since she arrived. That's all I can ask for. We'll take it one day at a time. For the first time in a long while. Emily felt a sense of hope stir within her. The road ahead was uncertain, and the past would always leave its scars. But there was a future, one that was still being written, one step at a time. And as long as they both were willing to walk it together, Emily knew that, despite everything, there was still a chance for healing, for redemption, and for forgiveness. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it was hers to take, and for the first time in her life, she felt ready. The days that followed were filled with small but significant changes. Emily stayed with her father for several weeks in Smallwood, slowly beginning to build a relationship with him, piece by fragile piece. She found herself waking up in the quiet of the small house, hearing the birds chirping outside and the soft creak of wooden floors as William moved through his daily routine. Despite the challenges, there was something calming about the simplicity of life in this small, sleepy town. It was a stark contrast to the fast-paced, often overwhelming environment she had left behind in New York. The mornings were spent together, having tea and talking. William would tell stories of his youth, tales of his family, his first job as a teacher, and his love for her mother when they were young. Though Emily had trouble imagining her father as a young man full of hope, these stories helped her see him as more than just a distant figure from the past. He was a man who had lived a full life, full of ups and downs, and who had deeply loved her mother once, despite their differences. There were still moments of silence, where neither of them knew what to say. Sometimes, they would simply sit together, letting the weight of their words from the previous conversation settle. There were too many unanswered questions, too much pain that had been buried for years, and they both knew that it would take time to work through it all. On one of those quiet afternoons, Emily found herself gazing out of the small kitchen window, watching the world go by as her father prepared their meal. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden. She had come a long way since that first meeting, when her mind had been filled with so many questions. Now, there was a growing sense of peace, albeit a fragile one. There was so much healing still to be done, and she couldn't ignore the reality of the years that had been lost. But in the quiet moments, when she listened to her father's voice or looked at the way he smiled at her, she felt something new stir inside her, trust. William, noticing her thoughtful expression, put down the spoon he was stirring and turned to her. Emily, he said gently, his voice full of the same warmth that had begun to fill their conversations. I know I've asked for a lot from you, and I don't want to rush things. But I want you to know that I'm grateful. Grateful that you're here, that you're willing to give me a chance to be part of your life. Emily smiled softly at her father, her heart heavy with mixed emotions. She had spent so many years being angry with him, imagining all the things he had done wrong. But now, sitting with him in this small kitchen, it was hard to deny that there was something sincere about his remorse. It wasn't perfect, and it never could be, but it was real. I don't know what the future holds either, Dad, she said, her voice steady despite the emotional weight. I'm still processing everything, the anger, the hurt, and the forgiveness. It's not easy, but I'm trying. I want to try. William nodded, a slight, understanding smile on his face. And that's all I can ask for. Time. It's the only thing we have, and we can only take one step at a time. That night, as Emily lay in the small, quiet guest room of her father's house, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since she arrived in Smallwood. The pain of abandonment was still there, but it was now interwoven with the possibility of healing. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe, like she was finally allowing herself to embrace the possibility of a new relationship with her father. The next few weeks were a continuation of slow but steady progress. Emily took trips into town to explore, often with her father at her side, and they began to form new memories. There were moments of laughter, even moments of joy, as they discovered each other again, not as the father and daughter from the past, but as two people who had been separated for too long. One afternoon, while walking through a nearby park, Emily asked William about her mother. "Did you ever stop loving her?" she asked, the question hanging in the air. "Even after everything?" William's face softened as he considered her question. "I never stopped loving her, Emily. Even after everything that happened, I always loved her. But sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, people grow apart or they hurt each other too much and they can't come back from it. It doesn't mean the love wasn't real. It just means it wasn't enough to hold us together." Emily listened closely, absorbing his words. She had spent so many years wondering if her father had ever truly cared for her mother, wondering why their love had ended so abruptly. But now, hearing him speak, she began to see that the complexities of their relationship were more than she had understood. It wasn't about a lack of love. It was about two people who couldn't navigate the pain they had caused each other. "I think I've spent too much time blaming you, Dad," Emily admitted softly, her eyes fixed ahead as they walked along the park path. "And maybe blaming Mom too, for not telling me the truth. But the truth is, I don't know what happened between you two. I don't know everything. And maybe I never will. But I'm trying to understand." William smiled gently, his hand resting on her shoulder in a rare gesture of affection. "You don't need to understand everything, Emily. You only need to understand yourself. And what you need to heal." That night, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the clear sky, Emily felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The healing was far from complete, but for the first time, she could see a future with her father. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be real. And for now, that was enough. Over the next few months, Emily continued her visits to Smallwood. She took time off work to spend more weeks with her father, helping him with the things he could no longer do on his own. They began to form a routine, and in that routine, there was a quiet but steady comfort. Emily realized that, despite everything, she had come to love her father in a way she had never thought possible. She wasn't sure what had shifted: the conversations, the shared silences, or simply the passage of time, but the walls between them had begun to crumble. She still held on to some of the hurt, the pain of the years lost, but she no longer saw it as an insurmountable barrier. Slowly but surely, Emily was learning to forgive, not just her father, but herself too. As she prepared to leave Smallwood once more, this time for an extended period, Emily knew that her journey with her father was just beginning. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew she was ready to walk it with him, one step at a time. The next few months felt like a quiet but steady rebirth for Emily. It wasn't just her relationship with her father that was healing, it was also her own sense of self, something she hadn't realized had been fractured for so long. The anger she had carried for years. The anger that had been aimed at her father, her mother, and even herself, was slowly dissipating. She didn't expect it to vanish completely overnight, but every conversation, every moment spent in Smallwood, allowed her to grow. And with each passing day, she learned to let go of the weight that had been suffocating her for so long. When she returned to New York, the bustling, noisy city felt jarring, almost overwhelming after the peace of Smallwood. It was hard to explain to anyone what had changed in her. Her colleagues at the communications firm didn't know about her journey to reconnect with her father. and she hadn't yet shared the details with anyone close to her. The process of healing was deeply personal, something she wasn't ready to expose to the world just yet. But the change within her was undeniable. As Emily resumed her work at the firm, she found herself more patient, more present with her colleagues. The sharp edge of her ambition, the drive that had often left her feeling exhausted and distant, had softened. Her work was still important to her, but she no longer felt the need to bury herself in it as a means of distraction. She understood now that no amount of work would ever fill the void her father's absence had left, but it wasn't the only thing that defined her. The phone calls with William became more frequent. They would talk about everything: his health, the weather in Smallwood, his small victories in getting around town, and even simple things like what he'd had for dinner. The mundane became meaningful. Every call, every exchange felt like a new thread weaving their lives together, connecting the years that had been lost. Sometimes, they spoke about memories from her childhood, and other times, they sat in silence, content in the shared space of being father and daughter again. Emily's visits to Smallwood continued. Each time she arrived, there was a sense of anticipation, a quiet joy in the familiarity of her father's home, and even the routine of their days. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the trees, talking about everything and nothing at all. Emily was beginning to appreciate the small, simple moments, something she had always overlooked before. Life in Smallwood was slow, deliberate, and full of nuance. There were no deadlines, no rush to get somewhere, just the slow, steady rhythm of life. One evening, during a visit in early spring, Emily and William sat outside, wrapped in light blankets as the chill of the evening air began to settle in. The trees were starting to bud, their soft green leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. William had made tea, and they sat in comfortable silence, both of them enjoying the peace that had slowly become their new reality. "I've been thinking a lot," Emily said after a while, her voice thoughtful as she stirred her tea absent-mindedly. "About what comes next." William turned his head toward her, his blind eyes still able to sense the change in her tone. "What do you mean?" She looked out toward the horizon, trying to put her thoughts into words. "I guess, after everything we've been through, I'm starting to realize that healing isn't just about fixing the past. It's also about deciding how we move forward. I've spent so much time looking back, trying to figure out why things happened the way they did. But now, I think I need to start focusing on the future. On us." William smiled softly, and Emily felt a warmth in her chest. It wasn't just the love between them, it was the understanding that had slowly formed over the months. She had been angry, confused, and hurt, but now there was something else: forgiveness. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It had taken time, and it had taken vulnerability from both of them. And now, they had built something new together. "I don't know what the future holds either, Dad," Emily continued. "But I want to be a part of your life. I want you to be a part of mine. I want to learn more about you. I think I'm ready to share more of my life with you too." Her words were slow, but each one felt like a small, significant promise. She wasn't sure what shape their relationship would take in the years to come, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to see it unfold. William's voice was gentle when he spoke again. "You've already done more than I ever hoped, Emily. You've given me a chance to be here, to make up for some of the lost time. I never expected that. But I'll always be here for you, in whatever way you need." The vulnerability in his words hit Emily like a wave, a reminder of the man who had lived with regret and who now, despite everything, was offering her his love in the only way he knew how. She squeezed his hand gently, her heart full of gratitude. "You don't need to make up for anything, Dad," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're here now. That's all that matters." In the days that followed, Emily began to consider what it would mean for her to truly integrate this new chapter of her life into her everyday existence. She had reconciled with her past, but she knew that the future would be built on the foundation they were now slowly creating. There was still much for them to learn about each other. But for the first time, Emily wasn't afraid of what that future might look like. Back in New York, her life continued as before. But now there was a sense of quiet confidence in her. She found herself taking more time for herself, reconnecting with friends, exploring her passions outside of work, and thinking more about what she truly wanted in life. The piece that had always felt missing, her relationship with her father, was now in a place of quiet, steady growth. It wasn't perfect, and it would never be, but it was enough. And Emily was beginning to understand that sometimes that was all we could ask for. As the months passed, Emily and William made plans for the future. She would visit more frequently, and they would even take small trips together. Emily began to see her father not as the man who had abandoned her, but as someone she was learning to love again, piece by piece. The future, though uncertain, was full of possibilities, and for the first time in her life, Emily didn't feel alone. And that was enough. More than enough. As the days turned into weeks, Emily's visits to Smallwood became a fixture in her life. The town, though small and quiet, had become a symbol of the healing she and her father were experiencing together. Each visit, she grew more comfortable with the idea of her father being a permanent part of her life, and with every conversation, the bond between them deepened. However, Emily knew that she couldn't hide away in the comfort of Smallwood forever. She had a life in New York, a demanding job, responsibilities, and friends who hadn't seen much of her in recent months. The balance between her past in Smallwood and her present in the city was difficult to maintain. It was clear that the journey of reconciliation with her father was just the beginning. The larger challenge was figuring out how to navigate the complexities of both worlds. One morning, during a phone call with her father, Emily voiced her concerns. "Dad, I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice tinged with hesitation. "I can't keep dividing my time between here and New York. I know I've been coming back a lot, and I need to figure out what happens next." There was a brief pause on the other end before William replied softly, his tone as steady as it had been over the past months. "You don't have to choose, Emily. I'm not asking you to stay here all the time. You've got your life in New York, and I want you to live it. But know this, whenever you need a break, whenever you need to find peace, I'll always be here." Emily nodded, though he couldn't see her. His words settled in her chest, the weight of them both reassuring and heavy. For so many years, she had been terrified of the idea of leaving her father behind once more. But hearing him say that so freely, without any sense of guilt or expectation, made her feel lighter. It was the first time she felt that her decisions were hers to make, without the burden of carrying the past on her shoulders. "Thank you, Dad. I needed to hear that," Emily replied, her voice stronger. "I'll figure it out. I just need to take it one day at a time." And she did. The following weeks were a whirlwind of new decisions. Emily went back to New York, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. She started reconnecting with old friends who had been worried about her. She made time for herself, taking long walks in the park, visiting museums, and diving into projects that inspired her. She felt herself coming alive again, balancing the life she had built with the healing process she had started with her father. Work at the communications firm continued, but it no longer consumed her in the same way. She set clearer boundaries, carving out time for the things that mattered most. She started exploring freelance writing, something she had always wanted to try but had never had the time for. It felt like an exciting new chapter, a chance to rediscover herself outside of her professional identity. But despite the busy nature of her life in New York, Emily found herself consistently thinking about her father. She missed their quiet moments in Smallwood, the mornings spent drinking tea on the porch, the evenings spent in the garden, the deep, meaningful conversations that felt like life's most important lessons. It wasn't just the small-town life she missed, it was the connection she had forged with him. For the first time in years, she no longer felt like she was drifting, alone in a sea of unanswered questions. One evening, after another phone call with William, she sat down at her desk in her New York apartment and reflected on how much she had changed over the past few months. There was a sense of peace in her heart that had been absent for so long. She wasn't afraid anymore, not of her past, not of the pain, and not of the future. She had begun to forgive herself and, in turn, her father. She had stopped seeing him as a figure of blame, and instead, she was learning to embrace him as a part of her life again. It was a slow process, but it was healing and it was real. Emily knew there was still a long way to go. She still had questions, still had moments of frustration, but those moments were no longer all-consuming. She had learned that healing wasn't a linear path. It wasn't about getting over the past in one fell swoop. It was about finding ways to live with it, to integrate it into the person you were becoming. And with every visit to Smallwood, with every phone call to her father, she felt herself moving closer to the person she wanted to be. One crisp autumn weekend, Emily drove back to Smallwood, this time for an extended visit. It had been several months since she had last spent more than a few days there, and she was excited to reconnect with her father in the place where their healing had truly begun. When she arrived, William greeted her at the door, as he always did, but this time, there was something different in his eyes. There was a quiet joy that hadn't been there before. A sense of peace that made Emily's heart swell. "Welcome home," he said softly, stepping aside to let her in. Home. The word struck her unexpectedly, but it felt right. It was the first time in years that she had felt like she truly belonged somewhere. Not just in the place, but with him. Her father. Her family. They spent the next few days doing things they had both grown accustomed to, walking through the town, visiting old friends of William's, and talking for hours. There was an ease now, a rhythm that came from truly knowing each other. For the first time, Emily wasn't afraid of being vulnerable with him. She shared stories of her life in New York, her frustrations, her joys, and her dreams. And William listened, truly listened, without judgment, offering his wisdom, his love, and his unwavering support. On the last evening of her visit, as they sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily looked over at her father. There was something deeply reassuring in the simplicity of that moment. "Dad," she said, her voice steady, "I've been thinking about everything. About us. And I just wanted to say, thank you. For being here. For being real." William smiled, his hand resting on hers. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. I'm just glad to be here with you in whatever way I can be." For the first time, Emily realized that the road to healing wasn't just about finding closure. It was about creating new moments, new memories, and embracing them as part of her story. The past would always be a part of her, and that was okay. What mattered now was the future they were building together. As she prepared to head back to New York, Emily felt a sense of contentment that she had never known before. She had made peace with the past, and she was ready to embrace whatever the future held, with her father by her side. And with a heart full of forgiveness and love. The journey wasn't over. There would still be bumps along the way, but for the first time, Emily felt confident that she could handle whatever came next. The foundation had been laid, and now, together, she and her father could move forward, hand in hand, into the unknown. The drive back to New York was a quiet one. As Emily navigated the familiar winding roads that led her out of Smallwood, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come in such a short period of time. The relationship she had with her father, which once seemed like a distant dream, now felt real, tangible. They had both changed, both grown, and though it wasn't perfect, it was something worth cherishing. For the first time in years, Emily felt like she could truly face the future. She had carried so many burdens for so long, the pain of abandonment, the guilt of not knowing her father, and the anger at the world for not offering her the kind of family she had dreamed of. But now there was a peace within her, a sense of resolution. She had forgiven her father, and in turn, she had forgiven herself for the years lost, for the anger that had clouded her judgment. They were both imperfect, and they both had a lot to make up for. But what mattered most now was that they were here, together. When Emily arrived back in New York, she had a renewed sense of purpose. The city, with its fast-paced energy and constant movement, no longer felt like the overwhelming force it once was. She had learned how to balance her life, how to carve out moments of stillness in the chaos, and how to prioritize what truly mattered. Her first day back at work was an eye-opener. Emily found herself more patient, more present in the moment. She had always been focused on achieving the next goal, the next project, but now, she allowed herself the space to breathe. She found herself listening more to her colleagues, offering advice when needed, and taking time for the small victories. Her life in New York had once felt like a treadmill she couldn't escape. But now she was running on her own terms. And yet, even as she settled back into the rhythm of her daily life, there was something different in her. Emily's perspective had shifted. The moments spent with her father in Smallwood, sitting on the porch, walking through the town, talking about everything and nothing, had opened her eyes to what it meant to truly connect with someone. She began to realize that it wasn't the big moments that mattered most, but the quiet, unspoken ones. The gestures of love, the shared silences, the willingness to be vulnerable with each other. Though she was back in New York, Emily decided to take her relationship with her father beyond just the occasional visits. They began to schedule regular phone calls, not just to catch up, but to share their lives with each other in a way that felt real and meaningful. Every time they spoke, she felt closer to him, and with each passing conversation, she felt the years of separation slowly dissolve. A few months later, after a particularly busy week, Emily found herself once again driving to Smallwood. This time, she was going to stay a little longer. She was no longer just a daughter visiting her father. She was someone who had a deep and growing connection with him. She had learned the value of these visits, not as a means of escaping, but as an opportunity to nurture their bond. As she approached the familiar town, the first thing that struck her was how at peace she felt in that moment. The roads hadn't changed, the houses looked the same, and yet everything felt different to her now. The town had become a symbol of the healing she had experienced, a place where she could reconnect not just with her father, but with herself. The landscape seemed to echo her inner transformation, calm, steady, and full of potential. When she arrived at William's house, he was sitting on the porch, just as he had so many times before. There was a sense of contentment in his posture, as though he had found his place in the world, just as she had found hers. "Welcome back," William said, his voice full of warmth as he stood to greet her. "I've missed you." Emily smiled, feeling the weight of his words sink deep into her heart. "I've missed you too, Dad," she replied, stepping forward to embrace him. This was no longer just a visit. This was home, in a sense, a place where she could be fully herself without fear or judgment. They spent the evening together, catching up, sharing stories, and reminiscing about the past. As they sat in the living room, the house warm and comfortable, Emily realized how much her perception had shifted. She wasn't looking for closure anymore. She wasn't searching for answers to questions that had haunted her for so long. What mattered now was the present, the moments they were creating together. Later that night, as Emily sat on the porch alone, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, she thought back to the first night she had arrived here, filled with doubt and fear. The woman who had stepped onto this porch was so different from the woman who sat there now. She had spent years questioning herself, blaming her father, and holding on to anger that had weighed her down. But in that time, she had learned something important, that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about embracing it. It was about finding peace with what had happened and using that understanding to move forward. As the stars twinkled above her, Emily closed her eyes for a moment and breathed in the fresh air. The world was quiet, still, but within her, there was a sense of quiet joy. She had learned that forgiveness, whether of others or of herself, was a gift that allowed her to move forward with a heart free of the burden of resentment. When William joined her a few minutes later, he sat beside her, and they shared the silence, comfortable in each other's presence. Emily realized that just being together, here, in this moment, was enough. It didn't matter how much time had been lost, or how much healing still lay ahead. What mattered was that they were here, together, and that they had a future, one filled with possibility, with love, and with the kind of quiet peace that only time, understanding, and forgiveness could bring. The journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but Emily no longer feared them. With her father by her side, and with a heart open to healing, she was ready for whatever came next. She knew that together, they could face anything. And that was all she needed to know. As the night grew deeper and the stars above them shone brightly, Emily and her father sat in quiet conversation, knowing that their bond was one that could never be broken. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt truly, completely at home. The weeks that followed were filled with a sense of balance Emily hadn't felt in years. She continued her work in New York, now more grounded than ever. But the calls to her father became a regular part of her routine. Each conversation added another layer to their relationship. Each moment spent apart made the reunion sweeter. The bond they were rebuilding felt natural, effortless, as if it had always been there, buried beneath years of silence. She found herself telling him more about her life in the city, her work, her friendships, and even her dreams for the future. She realized, with a little surprise, that she had been so focused on healing the past that she hadn't given much thought to the future. But now, she was beginning to dream again. Not just of reconnecting with her father, but of pursuing her own passions, of finding balance between the ambitious woman she had become and the more relaxed, reflective side she had rediscovered in Smallwood. On one particular evening, as Emily was winding down from a busy day at the firm, her phone rang. It was William. She smiled at the familiar name on the screen, knowing that this was a call she always looked forward to. "Hey, Dad," she said as she picked up the phone, her voice warm with affection. "Hey, kiddo. I've been meaning to tell you something." William's voice was full of excitement, a rare thing she'd come to cherish. "What's up?" she asked, curious. "I've been thinking. I want to come to New York for a visit. I haven't seen your city, and it feels like it's time. I want to see where you've been living, meet your friends. I think it'll be good for us." Emily's heart skipped a beat. The idea of William coming to New York was something she had never imagined. She had always felt like her life there and her life with him were two separate worlds. But hearing him express this desire to be part of her city, part of her world, filled her with a new sense of excitement and pride. "Really? You want to come here?" she asked, still a little stunned. "I would love that, Dad. It'll be great. We can go to Central Park, maybe see a Broadway show. I'll show you the places that matter to me." "I can't wait," he replied, his voice filled with warmth. "I know it'll be an adjustment for me, but I want to do this. I want to be part of your world in a way I've never been." The thought of her father visiting her in New York was both exciting and nerve-wracking. She realized she had built a life in the city that was very different from the one they had shared in Smallwood. The fast pace, the noise, the constant rush, it was a world that felt so far removed from the peaceful, simple life they had begun to rebuild together. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how important it was for him to be there, to step into her world, just as she had stepped into his. The planning began almost immediately. Emily started looking up accessible places for her father, making sure the city would be comfortable for him. She knew the challenge would be balancing the slower pace of Smallwood with the relentless energy of New York. But she also knew that this visit would mark a new chapter in their relationship, one where they could bridge the gap between the two worlds they inhabited. When the day finally arrived, Emily waited for her father at the airport, her heart pounding with anticipation. The thought of him navigating the city, with its overwhelming crowds and constant movement, made her nervous. But as she spotted him walking through the terminal, his cane tapping the ground in steady rhythm, a sense of calm washed over her. This was her father, the man who had once been a stranger, now here to experience the world she had created for herself. "Dad," she called, waving excitedly as he made his way toward her. He grinned, his face lighting up with the same warmth that had made her heart ache when she first saw him in Smallwood months ago. "I made it, kiddo. This place is something else." Emily laughed, feeling a sense of pride. "I told you it was different. But I'm glad you're here." They spent the day walking around the city, starting with the quieter corners of Central Park, where the noise of the city seemed to fade into the background. Emily noticed how William took it all in, the way his fingers brushed the leaves of the trees, the way he paused to listen to the distant hum of the city. She could see the wonder in his face, the awe of someone who had never imagined being in a place like this. That evening, they went to a small cafe in the West Village, one of Emily's favorite spots. She introduced him to some of her friends, her colleagues, people who had been a part of her New York life since she moved there. It was a little surreal to see the two worlds collide, but the warmth and acceptance her friends showed her father made the experience feel natural, like it was always meant to be this way. The next few days were filled with the exploration of the city. They visited museums, walked along the High Line, and even saw a Broadway show, one Emily had promised her father would be the perfect introduction to the city's artistic side. William, though not one for the hustle and bustle of city life, seemed to find a quiet joy in it all. It was as though he had always known this side of Emily existed, but now, he was seeing it with his own eyes, experiencing it as a part of her life. As the days passed, Emily realized how much this visit had meant to her. It wasn't just about showing her father her city, it was about showing him that she had built something for herself, something independent, something strong. And in turn, it was about him stepping into her world, embracing it, and acknowledging the life she had made, even if it was different from the one they shared in Smallwood. On their last night together in New York, they sat on the balcony of Emily's apartment, overlooking the skyline. The lights of the city twinkled below, and a soft breeze brushed through the air. William sat back, his face peaceful, his eyes reflecting the glow of the city. "I didn't think I'd ever make it here," he said quietly, his voice tinged with wonder. "I didn't think I'd ever be a part of your world in this way." Emily reached out and placed her hand on his. "I'm glad you are, Dad. I'm glad you came. It means more than I can put into words." William smiled, his expression soft with emotion. "I've missed so much, haven't I?" Emily squeezed his hand gently. "We both have. But the past doesn't matter anymore. We're here now. And we have time to make new memories." The evening stretched on in comfortable silence as they looked out at the sprawling city before them. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt that familiar sense of home again, not in the city, not in the house in Smallwood, but in the quiet understanding between her and her father. It wasn't just about healing old wounds, it was about creating a new, uncharted path forward together. As the night grew deeper, Emily realized that no matter where they were, as long as they had each other, they would always find their way. Whether it was in the quiet corners of Smallwood or the bright lights of New York, they were building a future where the past didn't dictate their relationship. The future was theirs to create, together. As the days in New York came to an end, Emily's heart was full. The visit with her father had been everything she had hoped for and more. It had been an opportunity to show him the life she had built for herself, to introduce him to the world she had grown into, and to begin forming new memories together. As the flight home loomed, she knew it was time for them to part ways again, but this time, it was different. There was no anxiety or fear of loss. Instead, there was a calm understanding between them, a reassurance that this connection, fragile as it was, had become something unbreakable. The day she dropped William off at the airport, the two of them stood by his gate, an unusual silence hanging between them. It wasn't the sadness of their previous goodbyes. Instead, there was a sense of completion, of knowing that their relationship was no longer defined by the years they had missed. "Thank you for everything, Emily," William said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the woman you've become." Tears threatened to spill from Emily's eyes, but she held them back. She wanted to tell him that she was proud of him, too, that seeing him stand here, in this moment, was more than she could have ever imagined. But instead, she nodded, fighting the lump in her throat. "I'm proud of us, Dad. I'm proud of what we've built." William's smile softened, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder before he turned to walk through security. Emily watched him go, feeling a sense of gratitude and peace settle in her chest. He had come into her life in a way that had transformed both of them. It hadn't been easy. There had been anger, confusion, and hurt, but in the end, they had both learned how to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the future they would continue to create, one visit, one conversation at a time. As she made her way back to the city, Emily couldn't help but feel a shift within herself. She had spent so much of her life chasing after answers, seeking closure, trying to make sense of the pieces of her past. But now she realized the answers didn't matter as much as she had thought. What mattered was how she moved forward, how she continued to build on the foundation she had created with her father, how she continued to live the life she had worked so hard for. She had found peace, not by erasing the past, but by accepting it and choosing to grow beyond it. The next few months were filled with new beginnings. Emily threw herself into her writing, taking on projects that inspired her. She reached out to friends she had neglected, making time for the people who had always supported her. Her life, once ruled by a sense of guilt and confusion, had become something vibrant and full. She had found balance. And yet, Smallwood remained a constant. It wasn't just a place on the map, it had become a part of her heart. She continued to visit her father regularly, her trips to the small town now something she looked forward to with joy, rather than as an escape. Each time she arrived, she felt herself growing stronger, more confident in the decisions she was making. And William, in turn, was beginning to feel more comfortable in her world. He was still adjusting to city life, but he no longer felt like an outsider looking in. With every phone call, every visit, every shared moment, they were both learning how to navigate their relationship in the present, rather than being bogged down by the weight of the past. One evening, as Emily sat in the small living room of her father's house, they talked about their future plans. There was an ease to their conversation now, a natural flow that had once felt impossible. Emily had learned to listen with her heart, and she could sense her father's quiet happiness. "You know, I've been thinking," William said as he sipped his tea. "I'm not as young as I used to be, and maybe it's time for me to make a bigger change. I've been alone here for a long time, and I think maybe I should come live closer to you." In New York, Emily's heart skipped a beat. The idea of her father living in the city had never crossed her mind in this way. She had always seen him as part of Smallwood, a constant in a place she had grown to love. But the thought of him living closer, being part of her day-to-day life, was both thrilling and intimidating. "Are you sure?" she asked, trying to gauge how serious he was. "It's a big change, Dad. New York isn't easy, and I know you've gotten used to the peace here." William smiled, a soft, knowing look in his eyes. "It's true, New York isn't quiet, but it's where you are, Emily. And I want to be closer to you. I think it's time for me to start a new chapter. I don't want to be stuck in the past anymore. I want to be a part of your world." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she looked at her father. She had spent so many years feeling disconnected, unsure of who they were to each other. But in that moment, she saw how far they had come. He had made a decision for himself, a choice to step out of his comfort zone and into her life. It wasn't just about them being father and daughter anymore. It was about them being two people who were willing to grow, to take risks, and to embrace the future together. "That sounds like a great idea," Emily said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I would love for you to be closer. I think it would be good for both of us." The next few months were spent preparing for this new chapter. William made arrangements to move closer to the city, and Emily helped him find a place that would feel like home. It was a new beginning, not just for him, but for her as well. She had never imagined that their relationship would evolve in this way, that they would come together not just as father and daughter, but as two people learning to navigate life together. But now, as they made plans for the future, Emily knew that this was the right path. She had come to understand that home wasn't a place. It was the people you loved and the connections you built along the way. As the day of William's move drew closer, Emily reflected on how much had changed in her life. The healing, the forgiveness, the acceptance, they had all brought her to this moment. And now she was ready for whatever the future held. With her father by her side, with a heart open to the world, She knew that she was prepared for the next chapter. And as she watched her father settle into his new home, just a few blocks away from hers, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. They were no longer two people separated by years of silence. They were two people walking forward together, hand in hand, ready to embrace the life they had yet to fully live. The past was behind them, but the future was theirs to create. And that was enough. The transition to having William closer was smoother than Emily had expected. The first few weeks were filled with small adjustments, William learning how to navigate the city streets with his cane, figuring out public transport, and getting used to the sounds and hustle of New York. But there was something magical about having him nearby, about being able to see him more often and share the moments of her daily life with him. William's new apartment was modest, but it was cozy, and Emily made sure to help him decorate it in a way that made it feel like home. She found joy in every little thing, choosing furniture, arranging photos, setting up a small reading nook by the window, a place where he could sit and watch the world go by. They spent hours together in those first few weeks, getting used to their new dynamic, no longer just father and daughter, but companions in a shared chapter of their lives. Emily would drop by after work, sometimes with dinner in hand, sometimes just to sit and chat. They shared stories about their days, and for the first time, she could truly be herself with him without the guilt or heaviness that had once accompanied their interactions. Every conversation, every moment, felt like a step forward. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, William leaned back, a contented sigh escaping his lips. "You know," he began, his voice thoughtful, "I didn't know what I was missing until now. I spent so many years alone in Smallwood, thinking I was okay. But this, being closer to you, having you in my life like this, it's different. It's everything." Emily smiled, touched by his words. "I'm glad you're here, Dad. It feels right, doesn't it?" "It does," he replied softly. "It feels like we're finally finding our place together. I don't have all the answers, but I know I'm where I'm supposed to be. And so are you." As the weeks passed, Emily began to feel a growing sense of fulfillment. She had built a life in New York, one that was vibrant and filled with ambition. But now there was a sense of wholeness to it. Her relationship with her father was no longer just a place of healing from old wounds. It was a relationship based on mutual respect, shared experiences, and a deep understanding of each other. She found herself more centered, more sure of herself in every aspect of her life. One afternoon, as she was walking through Central Park, Emily reflected on how far they had come. The woman who had once been consumed by questions and resentments was now someone who embraced both the past and the future. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't a destination, it was a process. It was about accepting that things didn't always go as planned, but that didn't mean the story couldn't still be beautiful. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend, Alice. "Dinner tonight? We haven't caught up in forever. My treat." Emily smiled at the message. She hadn't seen Alice in a while, between work, spending time with her father, and the occasional trips to Smallwood. It had been hard to make time for her friends. She quickly typed a response. "Sounds great. Let's do it. 7 p.m. at your place? Perfect. See you then." After the brief exchange, Emily felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Her life in New York had once felt like a whirlwind, but now it felt more balanced. She had her father by her side, a fulfilling career, and a strong circle of friends. She had stopped running, stopped trying to outrun her past or hide from her emotions. Instead, she was living in the present, embracing the future with an open heart. Dinner with Alice that evening was just what Emily needed. They shared laughs, caught up on each other's lives, and talked about everything from work to relationships to travel plans. It was during one of these conversations that Alice casually mentioned something that made Emily pause. "You know, I've been thinking," Alice said, glancing up from her plate. "You've really changed, Em. You seem so settled. I remember when you used to bury yourself in work, always rushing from one thing to the next. But now you seem at peace." Emily thought about it for a moment. Alice was right. She had changed. She had stopped letting the weight of her past define her. She had learned that healing wasn't a linear journey, it was a process of coming to terms with who you were and where you'd been. And then finding the strength to move forward, step by step. I've realized that life doesn't have to be a race, Emily said slowly. It's more about the moments. About finding peace in the everyday. Alice smiled, nodding in agreement. That's exactly it. I'm happy for you, Em. I can see how much you've grown. That conversation stayed with Emily long after she left Alice's apartment. It was true, she had grown in ways she never thought possible. Her relationship with her father had been the catalyst for that growth, but now, she was taking that newfound sense of peace and using it to fuel the next chapter of her life. As the months went on, Emily and William settled into a rhythm. She continued her work in New York, but now she made more time for herself, time to pursue new hobbies, reconnect with old friends, and explore the city with her father by her side. They took weekend trips to museums, visited the botanical gardens, and even went to see live music at small venues around the city. It was a life that was rich with connection and joy. A life that was no longer overshadowed by the pain of the past. But despite the peaceful rhythm of their new life, Emily knew that they were both still healing, still growing. There were still moments of sadness, of regret. But they had learned to face them together without shame or fear. They had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about remembering and moving forward. One weekend, as Emily sat on her apartment balcony, gazing out at the city skyline, she received a call from her father. She picked up the phone immediately, eager to hear his voice. "Hey, Dad," she said, smiling. "Hey, kiddo." William's voice came through the phone, warm and steady. "I was just thinking about something. When you're free, I'd love to take a trip somewhere with you. Just the two of us. Maybe we could visit some of those places you've always wanted to see. I think it's time we started making new memories." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had always dreamed of traveling, of seeing the world. But hearing her father suggest it, it made her heart swell with love and anticipation. "I'd love that, Dad," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Let's plan it. Where do you want to go?" "I don't know yet. Let's figure it out together." And in that moment, Emily realized that this was the future they were building. It wasn't about erasing the past or finding closure, it was about creating something new, something beautiful. It was about the memories they would make, the laughter they would share, and the adventures that awaited them. With her father by her side, Emily knew that anything was possible. She was no longer living in the shadow of her past. She was moving forward with a heart full of hope, ready to embrace whatever the future had in store. And as she looked out at the city before her, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Because, in the end, it wasn't about finding perfection, it was about finding peace. And that was enough. The trip Emily and her father had discussed was just the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. The idea of exploring the world together, something they'd never truly considered before, felt both thrilling and healing. Emily spent weeks researching destinations, looking up quiet retreats, scenic hikes, and cultural experiences that would help her and William reconnect in a way that wasn't bound by their shared past. After much deliberation, they decided on a road trip through New England, a place known for its natural beauty and rich history. They would visit small towns, take leisurely walks through autumnal forests, and enjoy the peaceful rhythm of the countryside. For William, it was the perfect balance between the quiet, reflective life he had known and the new experiences he was beginning to embrace. The first morning of their trip, as Emily drove, William sat in the passenger seat, his cane resting beside him. The air was crisp, the trees just beginning to show their fall colors, and the landscape rolled out before them like a painting. Emily could feel the excitement bubbling within her. She hadn't taken a road trip in years, and certainly not with her father. It was a fresh start for both of them, an opportunity to make memories. Not as two people living in the past, but as father and daughter learning to appreciate the present. So, what's been your favorite part of the trip so far? Emily asked as they cruised along a winding road, the wind ruffling through the leaves. William smiled, his hand resting on the window, feeling the breeze. I think it's the stillness. The peace. It's different from the city, and I'm not saying one's better than the other, but this feels right. I feel more connected to everything around me. It's like I'm part of it, rather than just an observer. Emily nodded, taking in his words. There was something calming about the way he spoke, a sense of contentment that she hadn't heard from him in a long time. She was beginning to see her father in a new light, one that wasn't clouded by the mistakes of the past. This was a man who was learning to live, to find joy in the simple things. And for Emily, it was a reminder that they were both on a journey, not just across the country, but in their relationship, in their lives. That evening, they arrived in a small town in Vermont. Its charming streets lit with soft street lamps and the smell of wood smoke in the air. They checked into a cozy inn, its rooms warm and inviting. As they settled in for dinner at a small local restaurant, Emily couldn't help but notice how comfortable they were together now. It wasn't just the absence of tension, it was the feeling of being truly connected. They shared stories from their day, laughed at each other's jokes, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt a quiet joy, a sense of belonging. The days that followed were filled with simple pleasures, exploring the quaint shops of small towns, enjoying the crisp fall air, and hiking through the beautiful, golden forests. Emily and William often found themselves stopping at scenic overlooks, just taking in the beauty of the world around them in comfortable silence. It was a peaceful, grounding experience. One afternoon, while hiking along a trail that led to a scenic waterfall, Emily paused to catch her breath. She turned to look at her father, who was carefully navigating the path with his cane, a smile on his face as he admired the view. "Dad," Emily said, her voice full of gratitude. "This is amazing. I didn't realize how much I needed this, how much we both needed this." William glanced over at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think I've spent too many years worrying about things I can't control. But now, I realize that the beauty of life isn't in the things we've lost. It's in the things we still have, the moments we can still share. This trip, it's been a gift. A chance to rediscover each other." Emily felt her heart swell as she took in his words. This wasn't just a vacation, it was a journey of rediscovery. Not just of the places they were visiting, but of each other. In this quiet space, away from the noise of the world, they were learning to be father and daughter again. And this time, there was no rush, no pressure. Just the opportunity to enjoy each other's company. As they sat down at a bench near the waterfall, Emily reached into her bag and pulled out her journal. She hadn't written in it for some time. But now, as the cool breeze brushed her skin and the sound of the water filled the air, she felt inspired. "Do you mind if I write a bit?" she asked her father, who nodded with a gentle smile. "Of course, take all the time you need." With that, Emily opened her journal and began to write, not just about the trip or the scenery, but about the journey she had been on with her father, the healing, the forgiveness, and the rediscovery of a bond she had thought was lost. It felt cathartic, the words flowing freely, as though the act of writing was a way to crystallize the peace she was now experiencing. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire at the inn, Emily shared what she had written with her father. He listened intently, his eyes reflecting the flickering warmth of the flames. "I never thought I'd hear you say those words, Emily," he said quietly. "I never thought we'd be here in this place, having this conversation. I can't tell you how much it means to me." Emily smiled softly, her heart full. "I think it means more to me than you know, Dad. This trip, it's brought me back to you. And to myself." The next morning, as they packed up to continue their journey, Emily felt a profound sense of contentment. This trip had been exactly what she needed, not just to reconnect with her father, but to rediscover the parts of herself that had been hidden for so long. She had come to realize that healing wasn't a destination, but a process, one that they would both continue, together, in their own time. When they returned to New York, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road trip had given her the space to think about her life, her career, and the relationship with her father. She knew that there would still be challenges ahead. Life was never perfect, and they both had scars. But now she was more confident than ever that they could navigate it together. That evening, as Emily sat at her desk, her phone buzzed with a text message from her father. It read, "I'm glad I came to New York, and I'm glad I'm here with you. I think we've both come a long way, don't you?" With a smile, Emily replied, "Yes, Dad, we have. And I'm excited for what comes next." She looked out of her apartment window, the city lights twinkling below her. The future, once uncertain, now felt full of possibilities. With her father by her side, Emily knew that whatever lay ahead, they could face it together. And as she looked toward the horizon, she realized that the journey was just beginning.